Hey everyone, welcome back or welcome to our Aim Lab Spotlight, where we highlight some of the brightest coaches, players, and experts to improve your gaming performance. In this episode, we speak with Rambo Kim. He's a former professional Counter-Strike player and is a 5-time medalist and a Hall of Famer. We discuss best practices for coaches and players to enhance overall development and performance. We hope you enjoy. Ron, how you doing?
I'm doing good, Taylor. Thanks for having me.
Of course, man. So I'm really excited to have this conversation and really talk about the best practices for coaches and players. And so I really want to tee off with the coaching aspect. And I know you've got a lot of experience with that. And so one of the things I want to ask is, what are some of the core components to consider when you're developing young players?
Yeah, well, the first thing I try to do, whether they're a young or experienced player, doesn't matter any skill level or age, is to understand them, understand their goals, their strengths, areas they can improve upon, their personality, how they think, learn as much as I can about them. And then that way I can understand how to communicate with them, how their mind works, how I should provide constructive criticism, or are they someone that likes information up front? So, understand that relationship and that dynamic. And then particularly for young players, they're still finding themselves. So, as a human, as they're maturing, and also their game style, and they don't know exactly yet what their strengths are sometimes. So it's identifying those and trying to help push them there and develop where we see those strengths. And then where are the areas they can improve upon that they just aren't aware of yet.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, I love that you touch on the whole developmental track of that. And I think it's really important to really have that conversation. It sounds like your style of coaching is really getting to know the individual and really understand them at a fundamental level, because everybody responds differently to coaching styles. So you may have one individual who you can be a little bit more upfront in their face about with, direct input and direct feedback. Whereas another, you may need to finesse a little bit and have more of a side conversation. So I think that's really important for coaches out there to understand is there's different coaching styles and there's also different learning styles. So understanding how the players are going to be receptive to feedback and what might be the ways in which you can kind of camouflage or morph or provide information to really have it land for them and be effective.
Absolutely.
And so when you're thinking about, the overall team development, so we talked about the individual, but when we're talking about the team as a collective, how would you prioritize or really think methodically about developing the team chemistry and the team performance with, all the different individuals involved?
Yeah. I think once you have a team and once I have a strong understanding of each individual's skill sets, their natural play styles, it's much easier to develop and design a team system where I feel like they would play well together and where it makes sense. You don't have clashing roles or play styles, or you're not, putting people where they're not strong and forcing those kind of, where things don't make sense. So once the more I understand someone, the more I can design a system around them. And in terms of like overall team development, once you have that system in place, I like to work with the in-game leaders. So, what's your idea? How do you foresee the team playing? Are we playing slow, methodical? Or are we going to be fast paced and push the pace and force teams to play versus us? Once we kind of have that North Star of, how we're using our practice time, and that helps me understand what to look for during practice to see if there are certain players that are fitting into a role. Maybe they need more attention because they're just not understanding the system yet. So yeah, it starts with understanding the players, understanding the system, and then that helps me understand what to watch out for and how to help people.
Got it. And for those listening that may not have a lot of experience coaching, what are some of the roles that you would find on the teams?
Well, so there's two. I guess I can segment that into two ways. One is in-game roles and then out-of-game roles. So starting with out-of-game roles, you generally have a captain or an in-game leader, someone that's going to call the plays, someone that is the leader, right? Like that's the person that runs practices, keeps people in check, right? And then you have, generally you have like a supporting, like a co-leader, someone that sometimes pitches ideas. They don't want the full responsibility of the calls, but they still have great ideas. So inside, they'll bring up ideas with strats. They'll help with like the preparation. And then, yeah, I mean, there's a mix of personalities. Some players that like to take a back seat. They like to follow, what the leader has prepared and trust them. And others are more outspoken. In terms of in-game, it depends on the game. Some of the roles in-game are more easily broken down into. Like Overwatch, there's like specific classes like tank, support, snipers. Games like Counter-Strike, tactical shooters like Counter-Strike and Valorant. You'll have like edge players or lurkers. You'll have entry players, snipers. So yeah, that's the challenging, interesting part about a coach is you got to understand those two. For me, I got to understand those two elements of in and out of game and how to make it all work together.
Right. So in terms of making it work together, what are some of the ways you kind of help create or foster that team chemistry?
Yeah, I think that's a challenge that all coaches face is that you have 5 different personalities in a team or whatever number of players. And, and those personalities, that chemistry that those 5 players must have in order to be successful is a huge reason why teams break up or they stick together. So that's one of the roles or jobs of a coach is to be able to keep that chemistry strong and understand that there are going to be conflicts and disputing ideas, and things won't always be gravy, right? Like you just, you're going to lose a lot of rounds and you have to be able to figure out how to learn from it. So, if that's something a coach can develop is understanding their players and their personalities and knowing how to keep them on track and keep the chemistry strong. I think they'll have a high chance of sticking together.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think you've talked about this quite a bit before of having routines and good communication. And I think one of the big parts of when you're working with an early team and you're starting to figure each other out is to have those routines in place where you're doing briefings and debriefings, where you're setting the objectives for the day, you're going over strategies, you're talking about tactics. And at the end of the session, the training, or at the end of the day, you're coming together and you're doing a debrief to say, okay, what went well? What didn't go so well? What are some lessons learned? And then what are some of the wins we can celebrate as a team? And I think if the coaches can do a good job of getting into the habit of doing that and being diligent about taking notes on that and having the players do that for themselves as well, that all of that is feedback and it's continually helping to kind of course correct as they're moving towards that common goal.
Yeah, I mean, having a routine is crucial. I mean, one, for efficiency, if you can block out your practice days with objectives of what you're working on, it's much easier to stay on track. But sometimes when you don't have those clear, objectives or timelines or what you're trying to accomplish that day, you lose precious time that, you just can't have in a competitive industry, right? So, having that, and that's one of the jobs of the coach is to make sure that, these players are showing up on time. Everyone knows what they're doing each day. They have a clear objective, and that way they make the best of their time.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the interesting things about gaming and esports right now is there's not a lot of that infrastructure in place like there has been in traditional sports. So a lot of the young players coming up, they don't necessarily have that guidance or that framework, the structure and the systems and the scheduling to really operate from. So I think it's really important for the young coaches to keep that in mind and to help create that infrastructure to then allow them to be creative within that model of what the objectives are for that day.
Yeah, absolutely. And and with esports being such a brand new industry, there's no books, there's no proven systems that we can really, there's no data, research books, right? So that's kind of what we're developing on the fly. For me, being, I guess, a first generation esports coach, just trying to see what works in other sports, what other systems have worked, and trying to mix and match to match esports and my teams and the players and my philosophies.
Yeah. And I think that's the really exciting thing about this industry right now is you're able to kind of cherry pick different ideas from different sports, different industries, whether it's the military, traditional sports, non-traditional sports, and business, whatever it may be, and really kind of come together with the synthesis of a structure and a framework that really fits for esports. And I imagine there will be different generations and evolutions of what that looks like, but it's a really exciting time to be a part of right now.
Yeah, and just to add on to that, I think as a coach, your job is to develop the teams and players, but I think a coach should always be trying to develop themselves, which, trickles down into everything else. So yeah, learning from all sorts of industries and other skill sets, whether that's communication or psychology, it could be strategy or, routines or systems, whatever it may be. I think a coach should always be developing themselves.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that might lead into this next question I want to ask is, what do you think most of the coaches are missing right now when it comes to working with players? And I would suspect part of that would be make sure you're blocking off time to do your own personal and professional development so that you can better serve the players. But what might be some other things you would consider?
Yeah, I think, I think every person just generally has their strengths and weaknesses. For example, I feel like my strengths lies in creating systems and strategy and tactics and in-game stuff, where I could definitely get better at my human to human, my personal, relationship skills. So, or in other words, someone might be really good at connecting with people and understanding them how to give criticism, but they may need help in the strategy department. So I think a coach should try to be introspective and try to understand themselves and see where are my strengths, where my weaknesses, how I can develop my weaknesses and my strengths. And I think back to the first question, I think the first thing a coach should do is learn how to connect with their players and learn how to understand someone and what are those questions they need to ask, so, and then that's of course going to translate into their coach's skills.
Yeah.
And then the other part is developing that strategy and tactical part of their coaching skills. So, you do need to develop or train the team to be competitive at the end of the day. So learning the ins and outs of the game elements that are going to help their performance. So it could be mechanics, game sense, awareness, strategy, all those elements. So that's the interesting and challenging part about being as a coach. There are so many ways to develop and help a team.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's the real big opportunity in the space too, is, this next generation of coaches and players coming up have the opportunity to kind of learn from those who have come before them. Even though it's a relatively new industry, there's so much to be learned, and there's so much to gain insight from what went well and what hasn't gone well, and then use that to continue to innovate and move things forward.
Yeah, and I think if there are aspiring coaches out there, you could go the traditional route of going as a player and like competing and like going through it all, which is great. You learn firsthand experience, what it's like to be a player. And then, learning from, or say if you're not playing, trying to pick up a role where you could spectate matches, or so you could be an analyst role or assistant coach where at least you can sit in the Discord channel and like listen to the teams and watch them practice or scrim. So you're not actually playing, but you can hear the dialogue, you can hear the ups and downs, things that work that don't, and just trying to just be in that environment as much as possible.
Definitely. So I think those are all great points. I want to transition now into, some of the best practices for players. And, you've been a player yourself, you're a coach now. And so I think one of the things that I really want to touch on is, how can young players balance this competitive gaming life with, their social life and personal lives, as they're kind of going down that track to be, if they are an aspiring pro and want to be pro?
Yeah, I think the best thing they could do for any gamer that's trying to balance out their life is to establish a routine, especially a practice routine. So if you have team practice, Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 6 to 10 o'clock, then you can schedule the rest of your life around it, like your other priorities like schoolwork. But if you don't have that timeline, you don't know when to show up and when not to, you're constantly scrambling and catching up and rushing things. So yeah, I would say definitely try to create a time schedule.
Yeah. And like you said, so you basically have the priorities of that day, and then you plan around it and work backwards. So whatever leads up to it, and then what comes after.
Hmm.
When you think about just player development in general, what are some of the core components to consider when these young players are trying to build out a more robust style of play or just overall gameplay?
Yeah, I would say the main categories you should focus on, well, definitely mechanics. So, your movement, your aim, your crosshair placement, recoil control, all in-game specific stuff. You could do a death match, aim match, aim trainer programs like Aim Lab. And then there's your game sense. So your decision-making ability, when to take chances, when not to, like knowing those percentages, high risk, high reward. Um, how to win one-on-ones, what to do in 2v2s, that kind of stuff. And then there's which you can learn from like demos. So watching the pros, watching Twitch VODs, YouTube videos, that stuff. Another skill that I've noticed is the least developed amongst even the best pros in the world, like the 1%, from is their communication skills. So at the top level, I've noticed that everyone has phenomenal mechanics, game sense, ability usage, timing, all that kind of stuff. But it's always their ability to communicate with their teammates on a consistent basis, accurate and quick information under pressure. And that's a skill that is the least developed because it's the one that's least practiced.
Right.
You can't just hop in a communication deathmatch server. It's just going through and practicing, the multitask ability of playing and communicating. And that could be confusing for the brain because it's, you're working on your mechanics, and then you're thinking about strategy, and then you have to communicate what you're thinking. So a lot of stuff happens in the mind. But that's a skill that, the best players in the world can do, like the best teams in the world. And because of their communication so strong, their teamwork is strong and their chemistry, and they could just say within a couple words something, and their teammate clicks, and they know they're on the same page, and they're winning rounds that they should. They're not throwing rounds. They're not assuming things, or they're on the, different pages. So yeah. So mechanics, decision making, and communication.
Definitely. And to stay on that communication topic for a second more, I mean, I think it's incredibly important, not only just for in-game, but out of game as well. But in-game, especially, like you said, I mean, if you're not having clear and concise communication, things can get pretty wild pretty fast. And so if you're not able to clearly communicate, and like you said, people may misinterpret information, you may, start missing strategic points in the game. Do you have any tools or tips or tricks on how to practice in-game communication, and are there ways to practice out of game so that in-game you're more strong?
Yeah. So a drill that I like to have players do, there's 3 levels to it. So this is in-game communication drills. So the first drill is you load up your game of choice, and the goal is to speak a word every second. So there's no downtime or any pause or delay. So an example would be, okay, I'm running down this hallway. I'm about to pull out my grenade. I'm going to bank it off this wall, and then I'm going to wide swing to the left, and I'm going to crouch jump at the same moment, and I'm going to reload and do a 180. So they're communicating what they're actually doing in the game, what they're about to do. And that's just the basics, right? It's just like level 1, because you got to be able to communicate what you're doing, what information you see, what you're about to do. Level 2 is then working with a teammate and then communicating with them. So it's like a co-op. So if my teammate's running down the hallway with me, I'd be like, okay, John, bait me. I'm going to swing out, and then we're going to peek together. 3, 2, 1. Okay, it's clear. Now follow me. Throw a pop flash for me. Flashing. I'm going to peek. So again, you're saying something every second, but now you're communicating what you're doing and what they're doing. So that's level 2. And then level 3 would be an in-game leader. So someone that can communicate on behalf of everyone. So it takes a high amount of awareness of understanding where all the teammates are on the map, what they should do, and then communicating on all 5. Like, John and Bob, you guys fake A, and then us 3 over here, we're gonna delay peak. So yeah, that's how I would go about it if you have troubles communicating and playing.
No, I love that. I mean, I love the whole layered approach too. And so would you rotate through that communication? Because obviously everybody can't be saying what they're doing at any given moment. So would you rotate player to player each round, or how would you alternate between that?
Exactly. Yeah. So level two would be they would take turns. So one player would take the full lead, and the other person would just stay quiet and not do anything. And then you take turns. And then if you want to mix it up, you can have both players bounce off each other. So sometimes if I'll do this with someone, I'll ad lib and I'll test if they're actually if they're being receptive and reacting to what I'm saying. So I'll throw curveballs. I'll be like, okay, jump, crouch right now, Bob, jump, and then see how fast they do it. It's like not really game relevant, something we do in the game, but I'm
Sure.
throwing stuff, right? I'll be like flashing, turn around, and I flash right in front of his face, and see how they react.
Yeah. I love that. That's slick, man. I like that. Okay. So aside from the communication, what are some other like best practices when you're really trying to focus on specific skill development? So if you want to take like a mechanical skill, so I know you have a whole AIM training course and you're using AIM Lab for a lot of the training tools as well. Like, can you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah. So in terms of like raw mechanical skill development, yeah, I break it down into aim and movement. So there's your keyboard hand and then there's your mouse hand. So left and right hand, and they're two completely different mechanical skill sets. So the analogy I like to use for the keyboard mechanics, it's like learning a new instrument, particularly like the piano or the guitar. So the guitar, there's like 5 strings and 5 rows, and then you can move up and down the fretboard. And then to hit chords, you have to hit a certain combination of chords. And if the spacing or any of the pressure is off, the chord doesn't sound right. And right? So the same thing with gaming is like, you've got to be able to move that left hand up and down all the rows. You got to know the spacings. So when you think of a note or an image in your mind, you got to be able to hit it instantly on the keyboard. With that, instantly, but also with precision, with no fumbles or stumbling.
Right.
And that's a type of feeling. And there's, just training your fingers how to contort and reach and know the spacing, and memorizing what all the actions do on the keyboard, in and out. And then on the right hand, you have the mouse. So that's your precision hand. So it's kind of like, your drawing is an analogy I like to use, is where you have to draw with the mouse to aim the crosshair across the screen. And some of the drawing patterns are quick flicky motions. Some of them are really, really small. And so it's like figuring out how to place your hand on that mouse, and your arm and your shoulder, and everything connects. How to hold that mouse and position everything so you can draw that crosshair exactly where you want and how you want, with precision and speed.
Yeah, I love that. So now thinking about big picture, what would be like a very well-rounded kind of program or approach to training, whether it's, a specific day of training or like, let's say like a sample week?
Yeah, I would say, well, for an individual, so you could practice as an individual and then as a team. As an individual, it's understanding which areas you need the most improvement upon. Um, so being real with yourself and really thinking, be like, okay, well, my movement's lacking. I need to practice more on keyboard hand. I need to figure out how to peek better and move around the map. Or it could be aim, it could be game sense. It could be just playing a certain spot. So I'm having trouble defending a site. So I need to go watch some demos and understand how the pros are doing and see what I can copy and replicate. So yeah, that's definitely one approach to that, as an individual. And then as a team, I think sitting down with a team and talking together and being on the same page of how you guys are going to play a map. What are the strats we're going to develop? So it's not just a glorified free for all. You don't want to just hop in a server and then everyone's just doing whatever they want. You're not really practicing towards a certain style or a system.
Right. And one of the things I've talked to coaches and players about too is being methodical with the objective or the emphasis of your day of training. So if you're going to play, 2 or 3 scrims and you're playing, 4 or 5 days a week, a lot of teams that I've come across in the past basically just do the same thing every day. Whereas you could be undulating or having an emphasis for each day and kind of phasing in and phasing out, working backwards from maybe that game day. Can you talk a little bit about that, about how you would maybe periodize the training a bit?
Yeah. So, I mean, um, when you say that, I think of 2 approaches. So, you could start a week off planning ahead of time what you want to do, or the other way you can work backwards. It'd be like, okay, well, last week we really had some issues at these particular parts of the map, or we really need to find some solutions. So you can really just focus on those instead of just playing a raw number of scrims every single week, and really honing down and working on the areas that you need to improve upon.
Definitely. And I think the other key component of this too, when coaches and players are setting up, how often they're playing, is allow some time and space for rest and recovery. Because a lot of young players are just grinding the game, which I think, has benefits to a point. At a certain point, there's diminishing returns. And so being able to understand, and this is kind of where you talk about, being honest with yourself and checking in, of kind of noticing where that performance drop off is, and be like, okay, well, I played X amount of hours today and I started noticing my performance drop off. Let's say if we played 6 hours, right around like 4.5 hours, I started to just completely tank. So maybe 4.5 is a good cutoff point for that kind of style of play. And then being mindful of giving yourself time to recover, and then also give yourself that time to do that journaling, to debriefing, to kind of learn and then integrate what you learned into the next practice day.
Yeah, that's an all too common problem is, it's not about how many hours you put in, it's how you use them and the quality of it. And then, yeah, allowing some time for players to absorb information sometimes. So, you don't want to start off a day with 3 hours of just pure strat work and, theory crafting. You want to, the brain can only hold so much information and retain so much. So, understanding how to space how your practice apart, and how you're using that practice too, so for example, for me, I like to start every day with server work. What I call server work is we'll all go in a server together as a team and talk about what are we specifically practicing that day. Are we going to run these 3 strats? Are we going to just focus on defensive side? Are we going to work on our communication? And then we kind of, on that day, that's what we'll work on specifically. So yeah, server work time, probably about an hour and a half at most. And then you find scrimmages versus teams to actually practice and implement what we're talking about. And then making sure at the end of the day, you have some time to debrief, to talk about, okay, this went well, this didn't go well. These are things to note for tomorrow's practice that we want to try. And it's important at the end of the day too, to not, when you go over the day, at the end of the day, your energy can be a little fried, right? Like you're kind of out of your batteries. So making sure you time it to a way where people will absorb that information because they still have some battery left in their tank, instead of, force feeding this kind of criticism time at the end where it's not going to soak in.
Right. Yeah. Very good point. Is there anything else you'd want to call out, or things that would be really important to the people watching?
Yeah, I would say, for anyone that's just trying to get better in general, try to focus on those 3 elements, I think, is aim and movement, mechanics. There's a lot of great tools and resources out there. Obviously you could play in the game. AimLab's fantastic. And then there's the decision-making side. So if you truly want to get better at your decision-making and your game sense, you're going to have to put time in to watch the demos of professionals. It's the cool thing about gaming is that we can actually load up demos and see first person the best players in the world, what it looks like through their eyes when they play. We can't do that in any other sport.
Right.
So you could see them real time and see what they're doing, and try to think about, what are they doing differently from me? Wow, it's interesting. They made this play. I would have never thought about that. Let me keep that in my memory bank. So if I ever enter that situation, I'll just copy what they did. They're the best, right? So, and then learning from your mistakes is a big one. So, every time you play, let's say if you play around, every time you die, that's a moment to learn something. So really taking that moment to be like, okay, where did I make my fatal mistake? Where was that pivotal moment where I should have gone left instead of right? And then every single round you're learning, you're just getting better and better, instead of just kind of, mulling over that round and just moving on to the next. And I think the pros have reached their level. sure, by thousands of hours or whatever, how many hours it takes, and that's because they did make thousands of mistakes, and that's how you build your experience. But you got to give yourself a chance to learn from them by really taking a moment to think about it. And then the other thing is your communication skill. Like I said, that's the skill that is lagging behind the most at the highest level. So if you can start developing your ability to communicate with your teammates, even if it's completely random public players you've never played before, take that as a challenge to be like, okay, what can I say to get the vibe of this team strong early?
Mm-hmm.
Like, so, when I play with random people in a rank match, I want to do everything I can to win. And that includes, breaking the ice amongst the team. So I'll start a match, be like, hey, what's up, guys? You guys ready for a victory? Or who's ready to rank up? Or hey, Bob, you guys, how you holding the site? You want me to flash for you? So I'm trying to get that communication flowing and get the energy right. And, doing whatever I can to keep it there. And sometimes you'll have teammates that may be in a bad mood, or maybe they just haven't matured yet. And, take that as a challenge to figure out, what can I say to this person to get them on a page, we're on the same team. It's like, hey dude, it's all right. We'll get them next round, or let me drop you a weapon. And that communication skill is so valuable, especially as you get to the higher and higher ranks.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think really what kind of encapsulates all of that is just having a growth mindset and being willing to kind of find that edge and really expand yourself to challenge, see the challenges and everything that life and the game presents to you, and then find creative ways to come up with solutions and to really push yourself to, like you said, maybe get the vibe right, in game with some random people that you're playing with, or even if it's players that you play with for a long time, to kind of understand the nuances and get everybody kind of vibing on the same level. So I love that point. Well, Ron, I really appreciate your time. I respect so much of what you do, and I think you're just one of the great coaches in the space, and it's awesome to be working with you and collaborating with you on this stuff.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Taylor. Likewise.
Yeah. So where can people find out more about you? I know you have an awesome aim training course that just came out. So where can people find more about you?
Yeah, I have a website, fpscoach.com, YouTube channel. If you search up Ron Rambo Kim or FPS Coach. I also just launched a aiming course, like a FPS aiming course, everything I've known for my 20-year career inside there. So if you're looking to improve your FPS aiming, you go to fpscoach.com.
Awesome. Thanks, Ron. Appreciate it.
All right, thanks.
Hey everyone, we hope you enjoyed that episode. If you dig these videos, like it, subscribe to our channel, and follow us on social media, where we're constantly putting out great content to help you level up your gaming. See you next time.